Often begins with the most unexpected moments. Do you remember the first time your heart paused, not because of what someone said, but simply because of the way they looked at you, as if they saw something no one else ever had? That fleeting instant where everything else fades. For Clara, that moment came quietly on a night when she accidentally walked into the wrong hotel room. She was a soft-spoken elementary school teacher, never one to seek love or attention. Damien, a successful and calculated architect, had long stopped believing in fate. And yet, fate had plans of its own. One wrong door, one glance, and a story neither of them saw coming had already begun to write itself. This story didn't begin with grand gestures or perfect timing. It began with a door left slightly ajar, a heartbeat out of sync, and two souls who had no idea they were walking straight into something that would quietly alter everything. Clara wasn't the kind of woman who belonged in luxury hotels. She was an elementary school teacher who spent her evenings curled up with books, not at formal events. But that day, she had been invited to a private educational seminar on the top floor of the city's most prestigious hotel. She almost didn't come, but something told her to go. She took a deep breath and stepped into the elevator. As the numbers climbed, so did her nervousness. When the doors opened to the penthouse level, she hesitated again. The hallway was too quiet, too polished. But ahead was a door, slightly open with soft golden light spilling into the hallway. Assuming it was the right suite, Clara stepped inside. Damien had just returned from a long meeting. As one of the city's most in-demand architects, his days were filled with deals, designs, and deadlines. Emotions had no space in his world. He built towers, not relationships. A glass of wine rested in his hand as he gazed out over the sparkling city through floor-to-ceiling windows. Then, the door creaked open. At first, he didn't turn. Probably room service, he thought, but when he finally glanced over, his breath caught. There she was. Clara stood in the doorway, her figure framed by the soft hallway light. Her dress was simple, her hair loose and falling gently over her shoulders. Her eyes, uncertain and apologetic, met his. She looked utterly out of place in his world. And that's what made her unforgettable. Their eyes locked. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Still. But something in that silence shifted inside Damien. For a man used to control, structure, and certainty, he suddenly felt off balance. Clara's cheeks flushed. Realizing her mistake, she mumbled a soft apology and turned to leave, her steps quick, embarrassed. But Damien just sat there, frozen. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she had walked in. But he knew one thing with complete clarity. She had just walked into his life, and he couldn't let that moment disappear. The door closed softly behind her, but for Damien, the silence it left was deafening. He had built towers with steel and glass, yet in that moment, a stranger's glance had cracked open something far more fragile. His heart. He didn't even know her name. He didn't know why she was there, but the feeling she left behind was unmistakably real, too real to forget. Damien had met countless people, clients, models, powerful investors, elegant women at high-profile events. None of them ever made his heart stop the way she did. She hadn't tried to impress. She hadn't spoken more than a few words. And yet, her presence stayed with him. He found himself replaying the moment over and over. The way her eyes had widened, the slight tremble in her voice, the air between them, charged, fragile, fleeting. She'd come and gone in less than a minute. But something inside him had shifted for good. He returned to the hotel the next day, and the next, sitting in the lobby around the same hour, pretending to read, hoping he'd see her again. But she didn't come. A week passed. Damien thought about asking the hotel staff, but what would he say? I'm looking for a woman I don't know who walked into my room by accident? It sounded absurd, and yet he couldn't stop thinking about her. Then, one afternoon, he took a slow walk down the hallway near the suite. His eyes landed on the notice board. It still had the flyer from that night, the educational seminar. A small line at the bottom mentioned the organization behind it. It was the only lead he had. Maybe she was a guest. Maybe she was a speaker. Maybe she worked in education. Maybe. The word held no guarantees, but it gave him something he didn't have before: direction. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Damien didn't know what he was doing or where it would lead. But what he did know was that if he let her slip away without trying, he would regret it forever. That tiny clue, the seminar flyer, was enough to give Damien a trace of hope. He still didn't know her name, her story, or where she belonged, but now he had a starting point. She was somehow connected to education. Unlike business deals or structured projects, this pursuit felt delicate, fragile even. Damien didn't want to use his influence or resources to track her down like an asset. No, he wanted to find her as a man, not a strategist. He wanted to approach her with care. And one quiet afternoon, while walking through a peaceful street not far from the hotel, something caught his eye: a tiny bookstore tucked between two cafes. It wasn't particularly remarkable, but something about it felt right. He stepped inside. A soft bell chimed above. And there she was, Clara, behind the counter, completely unaware of him, lost in a book. The soft lighting made her look like part of the story she was reading. Damien didn't move. His heart pounded. This wasn't a memory. She was real, right there. He stood still, caught in the soft hum of the shop's silence. Part of him wanted to say something, anything, but instead he took a quiet step back. Some things, he realized, are too delicate to touch before they're ready, because somehow he knew this wasn't the moment. After that unexpected glimpse of Clara in the bookstore, Damien found it impossible to forget. She was no longer a fleeting memory. She had become a quiet pull that drew him back again and again. Clara didn't work there, but she visited often, usually in the late afternoons. Damien began to notice the rhythm of her visits, the way she always chose the same cozy chair by the window. She'd stay for hours, lost in pages, never distracted, always peaceful. She favored old classics, sometimes poetry, and that, to Damien, said everything about her: thoughtful, soft, quietly deep. He didn't approach her. Not yet. He knew that someone like Clara, gentle, reserved, could easily be startled by direct attention. So he waited, observing quietly. But he also knew he couldn't just remain a shadow forever. One day, he stepped into the store, selected a rare vintage novel, the kind he had seen her holding, and approached the counter. "I've noticed a woman who often visits on Wednesday afternoons, sits by the window," he said gently. "Would you mind giving this to her next time she's here?" No name, no explanation. Inside the book, he tucked a small note. "To the one always searching for beautiful stories, perhaps this time one has found you." Clara was surprised when the book arrived. The cashier simply said it was from another customer. No sender, no message beyond the handwritten note. But the handwriting, the words, they lingered. A few days later, another gift appeared. A leather bookmark. Simple, unbranded, but crafted with care. Attached was a soft card. "Every journey begins with a door, sometimes the wrong one." Clara had no idea who was behind these small gestures, but something about them, about the way they arrived, the tone of the messages, the care in every detail, felt deeply personal. Not loud, not invasive, just there. And for the first time in a very long while, something stirred quietly inside her. A warmth, a curiosity, and a sense that perhaps someone saw her in a way no one else ever had. Clara had started waiting for the little gifts, not for their material value, but because they made her feel something she hadn't in a long time, seen. Whoever this person was, he hadn't revealed himself, but somehow he understood her in ways even those close to her never had. And then, one quiet afternoon, tucked between the pages of a book she frequently revisited, she found it. A card. "If you don't mind, I'd love to invite you for a cup of tea. No expectations, no pressure, just two people who love books, even if we say nothing at all." Clara read it again and again. There was something undeniably gentle in the way it was written. Nothing forced, no pretense, just a soft invitation, born not from romance, but from understanding. So she went. The tea shop was nestled in a quiet little alley. It wasn't flashy or trendy, just warm, peaceful, and softly lit. And when Clara walked in, he was already there. Damien. No bouquet, no suit, no polished performance, just him, dressed simply, with kind eyes and a smile that didn't ask for anything, only offered peace. "Hi," he greeted, like they were old friends who hadn't seen each other in a while. They sat at a small corner table near the window. There was no flirtation, no rehearsed lines, just the kind of conversation that meandered like a familiar path. Talks about favorite books, childhood memories, moments of solitude, and the quiet ache of loneliness. And Damien listened, really listened, the way people rarely do anymore, with intention, with care. Clara found herself smiling, not out of courtesy, but because something inside her truly felt light. Damien didn't try to impress. He didn't talk over her. He simply sat with her, let her speak, and let silence exist between words without trying to fill it. That, in itself, made her feel more heard than anyone ever had. When the evening drew to a close, soft rain had started falling outside. Damien offered to walk her home. They shared an old umbrella, edges worn and slightly frayed, but it felt enough. There was no dramatic goodbye, no sudden kiss in the rain, just a stillness, a softness. At her door, Damien looked at her, not with expectation, but with gratitude. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come," he said, voice almost a whisper. Clara stepped into her home, her heart wrapped in a quiet sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. She stood for a moment, thinking back to his words, his presence, the way he made her feel unpressured and understood. And she realized, love doesn't always strike like lightning. Sometimes it waits, patient, gentle, until we're ready to open the door. After the first date, Clara returned home with a heart full of quiet warmth. Damien didn't text her excessively, didn't try to keep her longer than she was ready for, but somehow he lingered. In her thoughts, in the spaces between her moments, gentle, patient, real. In the days that followed, they didn't see each other, but Clara began to notice how the world looked just a little softer. She found herself thinking back to that evening, how he listened, how he never interrupted, how he didn't try to change her. And every time she replayed his final words, her heart quietly shifted. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come." One weekend afternoon, Clara went to a small cafe near the bookstore, her usual place when she needed quiet. She chose her regular seat by the window, ordered a cappuccino, and opened her favorite book. Everything felt normal, until a stranger sat at the table next to hers. "You look kind of out of place here," he said with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A girl like you should stay home. This place doesn't really suit you." Clara froze. She wasn't used to being approached like that. Her instinct was to shrink, not respond. Her heart started to race, not from panic, but from discomfort. She didn't know what to say. But before she could gather her words, a familiar voice spoke behind her, calm, deep, steady. "I think she's exactly where she's meant to be." Clara turned. It was Damien. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't rush, but his presence filled the space with quiet power. "Is there a reason you're talking to her like that?" Damien asked, his tone sharp but composed. "You don't get to diminish someone just because she's sitting alone reading." The air turned tense. The man clearly didn't expect to be challenged. He faltered, mumbled something under his breath, and quickly left. Only then did Damien turn to Clara, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice gentle again. Clara didn't answer right away. She simply looked at him, the man who had stepped in, not to make a scene, not to play the hero, but because he saw her and believed she deserved kindness. And in that moment, something deep inside her shifted. Damien hadn't just listened to her once over tea. He had protected her now, with calmness, with conviction, and without needing anything in return. For the first time, Clara saw him not as someone who might love her someday, but as someone who already did. And though her heart was still shy, still hesitant, she knew, quietly and fully, she had already begun to love him too. Something shifted after that afternoon in the cafe. Not dramatically, not like fireworks, but in a quiet, unmistakable way. Clara found herself looking forward to seeing Damien, not out of curiosity, but because being near him felt like breathing, finally, freely. Damien didn't press. He didn't ask for definitions or labels. He remained steady, present, always at the right distance, never overwhelming, never too far. He gave her space, yet somehow she always knew if she reached out, he'd be there. One evening, they sat together on a bench in a quiet park, under the soft golden streetlights and the rustling of trees. Clara hesitated, then said quietly, "I'm not good at opening up. I'm afraid people won't understand." Damien was silent for a moment, then replied, "I don't want to understand you so I can change you. I want to understand you so I don't hurt you." His words hit her like a gentle wave, deep, steady, true. Clara had spent so much of her life hiding behind walls, afraid of not being enough, of being misunderstood. But Damien wasn't trying to break those walls. He simply waited, patiently, outside the door, and slowly Clara began to share. Not all at once, but in pieces, her fears, her quiet childhood, the moments when she felt like she didn't belong. And Damien never interrupted. He didn't try to fix or explain. He just listened, with a kind of focus that made her feel safe enough to keep speaking. One night, her voice barely a whisper, she said, "You scare me because you're so kind, and I don't know if I deserve it." Damien gently squeezed her hand. "You don't need to deserve anyone," he said. "You just need to be you. And that is more than enough for me to stay." That night, something inside her softened, not from grand gestures or promises, but from presence, from patience, from a love that didn't demand, but waited. And for the first time, Clara rested her head on his shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Because to Damien, that moment said everything. They had spent weeks together, afternoons full of soft laughter, stories told in half whispers, and silences that no longer felt awkward. Between them, there was no more hesitation, no more distance, only this, quiet, whole, and real. That night, the city seemed to hold its breath, as if it knew something beautiful was about to happen. Clara sat by the window, the warm glow of streetlights painting her face in gold. Damien stepped behind her, quietly, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. No words, just presence, calm, steady, full of quiet strength. They had come a long way, from a fleeting glance in a stranger's suite, to hesitant conversations, to trust, to love. A love that didn't roar, but ran deep, quiet, solid, real. Clara turned to face him. Their eyes met, and in hers, Damien saw the answer to questions he hadn't even asked. He reached for her hand, held it softly, and then from his pocket pulled out a small velvet box. Clara froze. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to. He just stood there, eyes never leaving hers, as if in that moment there was nothing in the world but her. "I used to think I had everything," he began, voice slightly trembling, "but then you walked into my life, without knocking, without asking, and I realized I had nothing, not until you." He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, timeless, just like her. "Clara, would you do me the honor of becoming my family? Not because I want to keep you, but because I want to walk beside you, forever." She didn't speak. Her voice caught in her throat, but her eyes, shining through quiet tears, held no hesitation. She nodded, then stepped into his arms. And in that embrace, she said everything that mattered. Later that night, they sat together, hands entwined, wrapped in a stillness that felt sweeter than any words. As they stepped out onto the street, Damien and Clara paused beneath a streetlight. The soft golden hue bathed them in warmth. They turned to each other. two souls who had once felt lost, misunderstood, unsure. And now, they looked at each other the way people only look at the one they've been searching for their whole life. And without saying a word, they both knew they had found their forever.